Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 7, and today I'm here with my friend Dr. Tamara Soles talking about discipline on the gentle parenting path. Tamara is a mom of 4-year-old twins, Evangeline and Sawyer. She is a psychologist and parent coach in Montreal at the center she founded called the Secure Child Center for Families and Children. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. If you are enjoying the Sage Family Podcast, then please scroll down and click those stars in your podcast app or on iTunes. This is a quick and easy way to support the show using the currency of feedback. If you are loving the Sage Family Podcast, then become a part of it through Patreon, where you can support these important conversations, help make this show great, and get rewards doing it. For this adventure of the week, we met up with some friends at the roller rink. I was rocking my pigtails and tube socks, and it was so much playful fun. We danced like no one was watching, sang like we were in the shower, and everyone left sweaty and happy. Find the nearest roller rink, strap on some wheels, and I dare you not to smile. If you want to see photos and videos of this adventure, then head on over to Sage Parenting on Instagram and follow along. Today, my friend Tamara is joining me to talk about discipline on the gentle parenting path. I am a certified educator of infant massage, and I met Tamara 9 years ago at our infant massage educator training, which I actually did while wearing my baby Bay, who was like 3 months old at the time, and he's now 9. So we go way back. and we stayed in touch ever since. And I had the honor of supporting her with sleep coaching after she had her twins, and I have loads of respect for the really good work she does helping families. Most recently, her husband was kind enough to respond so generously when my oldest reached out as a fan with some questions about his work in special effects. So I love her whole family, and she is one of the few people in this world whose wisdom I would trust completely, and I think that about covers it.
Oh my goodness. You're going to start me off with tears. That's lovely. Thank you. Well, obviously the respect is fully mutual. And as I've said to you, I think, at that infant massage training, I really felt a connection with you. And I thought, she seems like someone I need to hang on to. And I'm like that. I hang on to people in my life that I feel like I connect with. And it's been great. And I've thoroughly enjoyed seeing your family unfold over the years, and it's great to talk to you today, so thank you.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You hang on to the people. I like that. I do the same thing. Hence, we're still friends like a decade later.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell us your story, Tamara. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What about your relationships in life fulfill you? What is your relationship with this topic of discipline?
So I'm a mom, as you said, of 2 twins, 4-year-old twins, Evangeline and Sawyer. And right now I'm just eating up being home with them most of the time. So I work part-time, but mostly I'm home with them, and it's such a great age I'm just enjoying every day and just watching all the new things that they do, and all the curiosity that's coming out at this stage is phenomenal. And the other days, I work in my private practice doing either therapy or assessment or a lot of parent coaching. And I enjoy that because I feel like a lot of my work is quite different than sort of mainstream psychology, I think, and mainstream child psychologists. So I enjoy being a voice for that side of things in the community. And I find that it's easy to connect with clients that like what I do because we have shared values and goals. So I feel it's kind of enriching me on both sides, both at home and at work, because this idea of connection with kids is so prevalent in both sides. So yeah.
I love that. I'm just going to say I love everything you say. I'm going to be like, I love that.
Aw.
Okay, so discipline is an interesting topic to have on this podcast. And when I posted in the group that we were going to talk about, when I posted in the Sage Parenting Tribe that we were going to talk about discipline, people were like, discipline? What?
I know,
How does that
I
fit?
know.
What do you do?
Because it's a dirty word, the D word, discipline.
Yes. So I'm a word nerd, so I actually want to go like way back and contextualize this conversation.
Exactly.
The Latin origin of the word discipline meant to teach and to learn.
Yes.
And Old English's version was a field of study, like choosing a discipline in college. And then the Old French introduced the meaning of punishment and suffering. And then the modern iteration is to train a person to obey rules through punishment.
Yeah.
Now, I hate pretty much every word in the modern definition of discipline.
There you go. Exactly.
So it's not a part of my parenting lexicon.
That's
but
right.
the concept of discipline is considered so central to the role, I can talk, of parent on the mainstream path that it's the framework that most of us were raised within.
Exactly.
So many feel a void when they step onto the natural path, knowing what they don't want to do, but not sure what to do. So if we're removing discipline, what fills in that space? And my answer would be connection and collaboration. But I want to dig underneath this concept of discipline today. And Tamara is just the perfect friend to do this with.
Hooray. Thank you. You know, it's funny that you started with that definition, because I would say that almost I would say 95% of the parent coaching sessions that I have start with me saying, we're about to flip discipline on its head for you.
Yay!
And I go through that discipline definition with them as well. And honestly, I find that even just learning that definition, or not even learning it, because I think in some ways they're aware of it, but just hearing it framed that way automatically puts a different lens on things for them. Yes. And I find that when I start that way, it makes it so much easier then to carve out that path with them, because they're already like, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So we're thinking about teaching. We're not thinking about, reward and punishment or obeying and things like that.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. Just getting at the root of the word really takes the dirtiness out of it.
And I think the natural extension from there, like the next step, is to step into the world of values, because like you said, that sort of helps to root the place that you're coming from. So first we have to talk about what are your values, and then second we talk about what are your long-term intentions. And by that I mean what qualities do you hope your children have in adulthood, and what relationship do you hope to have with them? And then 3, what are your short-term intentions? And by that I mean, what do you hope to invite your children to learn? And then the answers to these 3 questions will set your compass. And then we have to be clear on what direction we want to go before we can actually take any steps. So, Tamara, what are your values? What are your long-term intentions? And how have you experienced personally and seen in your work values play out with discipline?
So you already said connection. Obviously, connection is the number one. And so what connection means for me and for my kids is that I'm there with them sort of every step of the way, whether I'm physically there with them or whether they've internalized my voice, I'm there with them every step of the way. So it means I don't abandon them when they have big feelings, when they're tripping over their own development, as I often like to say. I'm there to support them and help them figure it out. And so that they always have that trusted person, no matter what, to help them through, and that they know that, in coming to me about things, that they can come to me about anything, and that, punishment isn't a part of that relationship. And so it's safe. And so that, in terms of setting my compass, connection with them ultimately sets their compass as well, right? We're calibrating each other through connection. So
see, I told
connection
you guys
is obviously
she'd be perfect for this show.
So connection is everything. It's where it's at. There's nothing without connection. Yeah. But then in terms of sort of other values I think about, empathy, which is sort of included in connection in a lot of ways. And again, when I show them empathy, that's how they develop empathy. It's through modeling and so on. So when I can say, I can see you're really struggling with that, or it must have been hard when she did that to you. They treat me that same way. And it's funny because I hear these amazingly empathic statements out of these two little beings, and it's wonderful. And it's not because I've necessarily read them stories and asked them questions about things, although we do that too, but
or demanded
because
and
that's what they experience. Exactly.
Be recited.
Exactly. But it's because they experience it. So empathy is a big one. And then I don't really know a single word to kind of put on this, but just the idea of everyone being heard, that my kids have a voice and that their voice will be heard, and that their voice is as important as my voice, even though sometimes I might have to make decisions that, aren't consistent with what they might like sometimes, but that doesn't mean that their voice isn't heard and it's not any less valuable than mine. Just the value of voice and being heard would be another one, I think. And determination, I guess, is another one. Like I'm a pretty independent person, and a pretty determined person, I think. And I think that has been a quality that has helped me so much, probably far more than whatever my intelligence is deemed to be or whatever. I like to see when they're determined, either determined to get through something or try something new or figure out an answer to something. And I love fostering that determination. So
I love that you chose that word. I think my word for that is drive. Personally, like that's how I experience that quality is drive. And it's so funny you said that, because I experienced that as really being the source of a tremendous amount of my well-being and success. Yeah. I had a friend in grad school who was doing her doctoral research on what is the quality that it makes the difference when you're looking at people who come from pretty traumatizing, shitty childhoods. Yes, exactly. Of course,
the clinical term for it.
That's the clinical term. I'm sure that was in the literature in her proposal. What quality distinguishes the people that grow up to be happy and healthy and successful, and the people who do not? And, really that was one of the big pieces that was coming to the surface for her, was that these people had this drive or this determination to become better and live better and all of that. And that was a random tangent. I'm sorry. Continue with you.
No, it's great. It's great. I mean, those are the main ones. I guess gratitude also would be another one. Just being very mindful of how I display gratitude, with them, again, the modeling, and then how I see it play out in them. And it's funny because it's always been, I think, a part of our lives, to the point where I'm remembering a story when Evangeline wasn't even quite 2, and we had gone, out on a little adventure, and we had stopped somewhere at a little cafe to eat. And as we finished up, she said in her less than 2-year-old voice, she said, "Thank you, Mommy, for feed me food." And I thought, the people around me are going to think I never fed this before. But, they're just truly gracious kiddos at this stage. And, it's not because, I withhold things until they say the magic word.
Right.
It's because that's what they see and they experience. And I think because they're truly grateful, not because they're reciting manners for manners' sake. Right. So that's important for me too.
I love that. Now, what qualities do you hope that your kids have long term? I think that's an important part of the conversation when we step into a space where we're going to discuss discipline, because so often on the mainstream path, we want, I just want them to do what they say. I want them to obey. Yeah. I don't want them to question everything. I just want them to do what they're told. And but then when you ask about long-term intentions, what qualities do you hope your children have in adulthood? It's independence, not just blindly following people in authority positions, and like it's like
and what are
basically
you
the
doing to make
opposite.
that happen? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So speak to that a little bit.
I mean, I think for me, it comes down to having thoughtful individuals. And thoughtful, I mean, both in terms of thinking about others and empathy, but also just thoughtful, asking questions,
I like that.
questioning things, and problem solving. And so, I think of all of that as kind of thoughtfulness. So people who can be reflective, because we don't get better unless we reflect.
Who
And
can be
so,
intentional and conscious
yeah,
with their choices.
exactly.
I like
So
that.
I think,
Thoughtful covers
yeah,
a lot.
yeah. So if I sum it up in one thing, I want them to be thoughtful individuals. And so, the problem solving and the collaboration all works toward them being able to, um, as adults, be able to tackle a problem and think of it from a different perspective, or not just sort of raise their hands and be like, I don't know what to do, and
Right.
trying to think outside of the box, so to speak, and because hopefully they've always been encouraged to think outside of the box.
Yeah, and you've
But
held this
yeah,
space for that, for them to work that out with you
exactly,
in a safe space.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah, and then I think when we're talking about discipline, that third piece is that like the short-term intentions and what do you hope to invite your children to learn. I think that's really the mindset that you should enter these interactions with, is that
right,
what do you hope to invite your children to learn through this challenge or through this moment? Because most of those mainstream reward punishment model responses to, when you
yeah,
ask what are they actually learning here, it's not at all what you would hope that
no,
they would be learning.
if anything at all, in fact,
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
let's get into that. So the reward
yeah,
punishment model. Now that
yes.
we've laid a conscious foundation, we can look at some outdated discipline models and see them through a new lens. So can you describe what this reward punishment model looks like, the
Sure.
misunderstood logic behind it, and why we choose to step away from it?
So ultimately, I think reward punishment comes down to this idea that we reward so-called good behavior and punish so-called bad behavior in order to increase the good and reduce the bad. That's sort of it in a nutshell. But there are many problems with it, but some of the fundamental problems with it are that it's just based on some principles that are simply not true. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't work, first of all. And as I've often said to parents, if a punishment works, why would you have to keep giving the same punishment over and over again?
Yes.
If it worked, it would work. But, so then they say, well, it just hasn't worked yet, but over time it's gonna work. So essentially they're saying that, once they develop the impulse control, it'll work. In which case I would say, then you don't need the punishment at all.
Yes.
So it's this, the principles I think that they're missing is this notion that, number one, you think that rewards are necessary because you think that children aren't already desiring to do the right thing. And I think that's a completely inaccurate assessment of children. I think most children are trying to do the so-called right thing most of the time.
Yeah.
And the other principle to that just doesn't fly is, that it believes that children can behave differently, and in many cases they just simply cannot, because their brain development isn't there yet. So for that reason, for me, reward and punishment is not a part of, my parenting or the work that I do with families.
Yeah. Like Alfie Kohn, I know, talks a lot about this reward punishment model. I love his book, Unconditional Parenting, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But he talks about how it really takes all of these things that are intrinsically motivated and pulls them to being extrinsically motivated. Like if you see a piece of trash on the floor and you want to pick it up and throw it away just because it feels like the right thing to do, if someone is rewarded each time they pick up a piece of trash on the floor, the research is super clear that they stop picking up trash on the floor.
That's right.
Like, so this isn't even just like ethically and morally it's the right thing to do. It's
That's right.
From like a research-based efficacy standpoint, it does not get you what you want.
That's right. The example that I often use with parents is which is common, these sort of library reading programs where
They
kids
get rewarded for
they
reading
sign
the
up for these
books.
reading programs and they get rewarded for reading. And that's the best way to get rid of intrinsic motivation to read, because for a child who's already motivated to read, meaning that they don't need stickers or anything, they're already naturally and what we call intrinsically motivated to read. When you shift that intention to reading for the sake of points or stickers or reward or a prize, then you've shifted the meaning of reading for them and the reason for reading for them. And so you completely undermine their desire to read for pleasure and for interest.
Yes, I love that example. So funny, whenever they have those summer reading programs, I collect like the cards that they give out, and I just I don't even mention it to the kids. I just like fill it out on my own, like all the books that they happen to be reading.
Exactly.
And then would turn them in, and we would get like a free kids meal at such and such restaurant or whatever. And basically, I just like took the kids out of it. I was like, okay, we'll get a free kids meal. But like I didn't even mention it to the kids. I just like filled in all the titles of the books. And
that's working the system. I love
it. Exactly. I think another piece that it definitely needs to be a part of the reward punishment model conversation is childism, because it really is an extreme form of, it's norm, so it's not extreme, but if you're looking at it through a lens of childism, it's an extreme form of that top-down power structure in which you're really taking all of the power away from the children and exercising your will over their bodies, over their voices. It's really rooted in, it's a childism-based model. Let's talk about consequences, which can be a part of the reward punishment model and can be outside of that. In the historical step away from punishment, consequences seem to be what have stepped into its place. But I have found there to be so much confusion, even among experts, about the difference between negative and positive consequences, which are two sides of the same coin, logical consequences, and natural consequences. So let's get into this and set the record straight. What are negative and positive consequences?
So the idea, things that are negative in theory from the psychological standpoint means that something is taken away, and positive is something that's added usually. So it can be helpful to kind of conceptualize in that way. But in general, sort of negative consequences might be things like a removal of privilege, like no TV time, which seems to be a parent's go-to for a lot of problems. Or even a withdrawal of attention. So like what some professionals would call planned ignoring or ignoring a behavior. That would be sort of a negative consequence.
Right.
And then when we get into the logical and natural, that's its own sort of confusing set of consequences or conceptualizations. But
oftentimes people are just comforting themselves with semantics by using the word consequences, but they're actually imposing punishments within the reward punishment model. And I think that's really the key to that first piece of negative and positive consequences, is that is the reward and punishment model. Then we get into logical consequences and natural consequences, which are a little bit different. Really, this is where we live. I think natural consequences, the vast majority of the time, are what we allow to unfold, and then logical consequences when necessary. So talk a little bit about what are logical consequences, what are natural consequences?
Sure. So natural consequences are the things that occur without any imposition from the parent whatsoever. So, if you're getting ready too slowly on your way to the movie, you're going to be late for the movie. Yes. That's a natural consequence.
If you don't wear a jacket, you're going to be cold.
Exactly. Yeah. Those are the natural consequences. So the parent didn't have to do anything to create this so-called consequence.
Yes.
Whereas the logical consequences are consequences that make sense for a situation. So they have to be connected in some way. So, if you can't use a toy safely, then you're not allowed to use it anymore. Until you can use it safely. Or if you break something, you fix it or help fix it. Or if you spill something, you clean it up. Or if you knock down your sibling's tower, you help them rebuild it or offer to rebuild it. So they're connected to the things that have occurred and might require some facilitation from the parent to suggest it or to make it happen.
Yeah, and logical consequences and natural consequences, like these are the same agreements I make with myself. For example, if I eat scrambled eggs, knowing they upset my stomach, real life example, I then experience the natural consequence of an upset stomach. I then might take it a step further and say, I am not to eat scrambled eggs that I make you guys. Remind me next time in case I forget. So that's kind of like a logical consequence. Like the natural consequence would be my stomach hurts.
Exactly.
The logical consequence would be, don't eat scrambled eggs when you make them for the kids. Like, you got to remember this.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's this expert, quote unquote, who I like, who gave this example, and she gives this example often, and it sort of makes my eye twitch every time she says it. This example of a kid leaving their bedroom light on, and she says the natural consequence would be to remove the light bulb from their light, and they don't get light in their room anymore. And every time she says that, like, that's not a natural consequence at all whatsoever. And I hear a lot of experts doing that, like using examples of natural consequences that are not at all natural consequences. That's a negative
or in that
consequence.
Case, even logical.
Yeah, like the natural consequence would probably be like your light bulb's going to burn out.
That's right, exactly.
A logical consequence might be maybe you could use your own money to replace the light bulb, or maybe you have to come with me to the store to buy the replacement for it.
Exactly. Yes, precisely. And often I'll say that if you have to think really hard about what consequence is appropriate, then a consequence is probably not the right tool.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't have to be something that you've pondered on and contemplated for 20 minutes to think about what the consequence should be.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think jackets and shoes, stuff like that are some of those things that when kids are younger, like parents ask me about a lot. Like, they don't want to wear shoes. Okay. Like, and don't wear shoes.
Right.
Like, they'll experience the natural consequences of that, like that's fine. It's actually better for them to be barefoot in terms of gross motor development and all that.
Exactly.
But like, for example, all of my kids went through a phase where they had wanted nothing to do with shoes, and sometimes the ground would be hot, and so I would say, if you want to get down and run and play here, I want to make you aware that the ground is really hot. Do you want to feel it? And I would slowly lower them down so they could touch like a toe on it, and they would feel that it's hot. And then I would say, do you want me to carry you? Like, you could ride around in the pouch, or you could put shoes on and run and play. Like, these are kind of natural consequences at force, or that naturally exist.
That's right.
And when you insert yourself in the middle, in between your child and natural consequences, you are really preventing the natural learning from happening and making yourself an enemy completely unnecessarily.
Exactly. No, I couldn't have said it better. And obviously, consequences that are too extreme to allow our kids to learn on their own. So, we don't allow them to learn on their own that if they don't stop at the street corner that, before to check if the car's coming, we're not going to let them learn that on their own and have natural consequences. But for the most part, when the consequences aren't dire and extreme, as you said, getting in the way of that is really preventing the richest form of learning.
Yeah.
So we have to steer clear.
Yeah, because you can be their ally on a natural learning path. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about our version of quote unquote discipline. It would be being an ally, like being in connection on this natural learning path, and natural consequences are a big part of that. Sometimes logical consequences are a part of that. Negative and positive consequences, not so much. Which again, I find that a lot of people just use in place of the word punishment. Like, you can call it consequences, just like you can call hitting a child spanking. You're hitting a kid.
Exactly. Yeah. You can dress it up how you want, but it's still the same underneath. Exactly. For sure.
Okay, so let's talk about connection. Now, the first response in any challenging moment is to join with your child. On the mainstream path, there's talk of winning and controlling and manipulating for the sake of an outcome. But if you are winning, then your child is losing and you're both opponents or enemies.
Right.
And that is
Right.
not the dynamic that we seek on the gentle parenting path, where it's all about connection. So what does it look like to connect with your child in the challenging moments?
So, that classic airplane announcement, in case of emergency, put your oxygen mask on first. I mean, that's where you start. An unregulated parent, so an out of control parent, can never calm an unregulated child.
Yeah.
So if we can't calm ourselves, then we can't be there for them. So the first always is to calm yourself. And if you can't, if you're really too riled up or heated up, then abandon the lesson at that time, because there's never a moment of so-called discipline that only rears its head once. So if you really can't manage it, don't manage it. Just leave it alone.
The opportunity for learning will present itself again.
Exactly. So we're starting there. We're always starting and checking our own state. And then from there, it means, how do I accept the feeling that my child is showing, but set limits around the behavior or help with the behavior. So, it's really about how to help yourself kind of view your role as someone who's the co-regulator, as the person who is going to be there with your child to help them regulate. And by regulate, I just mean, helping them come back to a calm state, and a state where they're able to be engaged with, either verbally or emotionally. But when they're too out of control, we can't do that. And, I think that parents often have this, understanding that with infants, we are the regulators. I mean, they might not use that language, but they understand that we're the ones who help, feed and keep warm and comfort and pick up and stimulate when they need. But somehow our culture, when kids start to walk independently and talk independently, we think that job is done.
Yeah,
and we
1 year, that's all you get.
Them to be able to do these things on their own. Exactly. And I'm like, I know plenty of adults who don't regulate themselves very well. So that understanding that your job as co-regulator continues.
Yeah.
And so
to be the state you want to see in your child.
Exactly. And how do you help, like I said, calm them first and then problem solve? But we can't problem solve when they're not calm. And so it also means attending to and validating that whatever brought out that situation. Most of the time, these situations are coming from a real place emotionally, but they just don't have the capability yet to manage those situations. So frightened or scared or anxious or whatever it might be, and it's manifesting and displaying itself with challenging behaviors. But if we miss that piece, of validating and empathizing before going into kind of regulate it, we're not going to get anywhere. So, that's really about the connection. And sometimes that means, getting down. Well, usually it should mean getting down at their level, connecting with them physically if they can tolerate that. Some kids have different levels of tolerance for whether they should be touched when they're really sort of had a hard time. But, whatever works for your child. So sometimes touch was more powerful than language in those moments. So just getting down with them, a hand on the back, that in most discipline moments, parents overtalk. We talk way too much.
Yes.
So how to be more selective about what we say.
Yeah, I think physically connecting and what that looks like will vary from child to child in terms of what their needs are and what their personalities are, what their love languages are, all that. Yeah. But physically connect, it may just mean sitting down on the floor beside them at their eye level, or it might mean a really firm hug, whatever it means. And then reflecting and validating, just reflecting the feeling, reflecting the situation, reflecting that you understand from their perspective what's going on inside of them, and validating that experience. And that really puts you both on the same side. It leans into a trusting relationship, and it disarms their limbic or their lower lizard brain that can take over with the fight or flight. Because
That's
if
right.
you join with them and connect and reflect and validate, it's amazing to see how quickly their
Yes.
brain can then switch
Yes.
back.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hard to think, coming back to what I was saying at the beginning, where, I think my kids trust me that I'm not going to leave them alone with big feelings. And, you know, again, I know plenty of adults who spend a lot of time chasing away big feelings in unhealthy ways. And that's not what we want.
Right.
And when parents ask me, like, how do I stop my kids' tantrums? We're asking the wrong question.
Yes.
It's not about stopping your child's tantrums. It's about how do we build the capacity to manage the situations that cause the tantrum to begin with. And so if we can do that, then, kids learn how to handle things better. But it's not about shutting down the tantrums. And
it's not about shaming them for having the
That's right.
feelings, because that just creates this reactive, avoidant response.
That's it.
Whenever they feel a big feeling, it feels scary and they feel full of shame, which just overloads the system.
Exactly.
So how to actually join with them and allow the feeling and sit with the feeling and see the feeling and maybe speak to the feeling and just let the wave move through you, and the parent can help to provide that any containment that's necessary when their brains are not yet capable of holding that on their own.
Exactly.
All right, collaboration. So after that connection piece can come the collaboration piece, which is how can we move forward together? And that's like one of my favorite questions, and my children could tell you I ask that all the time. How can we move forward together? So only after we feel connected and understood can we move into the action step of brainstorming solutions. It's the shift from the mainstream method of telling your children what to do to holding the space for them to learn how to make good choices on their own, or initially while in collaboration with you. So it's coming together, accepting a need, and filling in a skill gap on a foundation of trust. So can you give us an example of collaboration in action and explain a little more about the skill building aspect of collaboration?
So, collaboration comes down to a few key points, I think. One is problem solving, as you said, and the other one is communication, and respect, right? So ultimately, again, in the view of childism, some parents kind of balk at this idea that I'm going to allow my child to have a say in what happens. And it goes back to that, I'm in charge and they need to do what I say. And then they come and see me because they're not doing what they say. So, and the problem is the model, of course.
Right.
And so collaboration at work is, planning our day, and we have to go get groceries and we have to go take the car in, but you also want to go play at the park or go on a hike. So how do we what should we do, because we need to have lunch first, and what do we do? So what could we do first, or what order could we do things in? And involving them in that process helps, number one, just again to help them feel respected and involved and invested in the things that we do. I think it also helps with managing those things that they might not want to do, because they feel like they were part of the process and they kind of bought into this plan. Like, okay, we're going to do this first and then they're that. So it makes those things go more smoothly. So that family decision making just works better in general. But it also is about, little minor moments. It could be where, maybe we need to get out the door and they need to, they're insisting that they take a stuffed animal with them or something like that. So, we might say, I've got 5 minutes until we need to leave, and you really want to take something, but it's in, it's dirty. How do we, that stuffed animal was dirty from playing before. How are we going to solve this problem?
Yeah.
And again, encouraging them to kind of come up with the solutions rather than, me imposing a solution on them that, probably they're not going to be happy with anyway, and it's not going to be as meaningful.
And they're not going to learn as much from it. Like if they both want the same piece of cake, like, oh man, you guys both really want that same piece of cake. I've certainly felt that way before.
Exactly.
So how are we going to move through this together.
That's right.
What ideas do you guys have? What should we try?
Exactly.
Let's come up with some ideas and think about what that might feel like if we did those ideas and talk through
Right. And, and often, for example, if my kids are having like a little fruit pouch or something after dinner, and if there's only, one of the kinds that they both want, it's the same sort of example that you're giving. And I'll say the same thing to them. And it's amazing the kind of creative solutions they come up with. And it's not necessarily the same ones that I would have come up with if I had done it. And often those are much better than mine.
Yes, it takes trust. I
Yes.
think, in all of these podcast episodes, a theme that keeps coming up over and over again is trust. And when you're in collaboration with your children, for it to be authentic and effective and not just this fake reward punishment, top-down, parent is expert,
exactly.
Fake version of it. For it to be authentic collaboration, you have to trust in your children. You have to trust in the wisdom of their ideas, in their ability to come up with ideas. You have to be willing, you have to trust enough to be willing to try their suggestions and to believe that their ideas can have value.
Exactly.
And so that does take a trust.
For sure. And I would say, to add to that, the trust that the investment that you're putting into that is paying off. Because sometimes I'll have parents say to me, so you want me to sit there and say, okay, so you think you should do this and you want to do this. So how do we come to the solution? And how do you feel about his solution? How do you feel about her solution? I say, yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. And, and then they say, but that takes so long. And I said, yes, it takes long to develop problem solving skills. But, what you're investing in that moment, you hear play out later. I hear my kids when I'm not physically right beside them or helping them with something, and I hear them navigating those situations on their own. Now, of course, they can't do that 100% of the time, therefore. But, when I hear them do that, I know it's because we've laid that foundation at other times.
Yes, I call that investing on the front end.
But exactly.
Investing on the front end is such a wise investment.
Yes, and parents have to trust that investment will pay off. Mm-hmm. And, I think the educator, Annabelle Jensen, she has this example of these two brothers fighting over a lemon. And they each wanted the lemon. And finally, the mom stepped in and took the lemon and cut it in half and said, there you go. No more fighting. You each have half a lemon. And both kids were shocked and mad and both start crying and say, well, one of them wanted it for juice and the other one wanted the peel. And now neither one's happy, right? And that solution wasn't a solution, and it robbed them of finding a way for them to each get what they wanted, and learning how to navigate that kind of a problem. So that's what happens.
And that's
when
a
we
perfect
step in.
example of collaboration of an example of missing the connection piece that comes first. Because she didn't understand their needs.
That's right.
And she didn't hold the space for them to be able to articulate their needs.
Exactly. Yeah,
and then no one's happy. And that front end investment, it really does pay off. Like you explained, when you take the time to invest in the front end, you are expending so much less time and energy on the back end. For example, when I come to record a podcast, first I connect with all of my kids. We don't have any babysitters. All 3 children are here in this house with me as I'm recording this. And so I take the time to connect with them. I offer them food or ask them if do you think they might be hungry while I'm recording, and I might make sure that the food that they would want is available to them. I might join with them and get them set up in an activity first. Check in with them, what their plans are for the day, see if they need anything from me before I head down. I could just jump up and run down here and start recording, but then they would be coming down here every 5 minutes, needing my help with something or asking me questions, which would be okay too. But the point is just that it would require a lot more time and attention and energy on the back end than it would be if I front loaded that time and energy and attention. And then everything goes in a much more positive direction and it goes much more smoothly.
Exactly.
And I want to touch on especially the skill building aspect of collaboration. I think his name is Ross Greene's book, The Explosive Child, talks a lot about this in his version of collaboration, that when a child is really struggling with something, it's like a gap in their skills. Through collaboration, you can address that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, his model is essentially, the collaborative problem-solving model, in which the parent wants A and child wants B, and you navigate through that together, saying, well, okay, if I need to do A, or we need to do A, and you want to do B, how do we come to a solution that we can both be happy with? And sometimes parents are resistant because they feel, again, that it means that we're quote unquote giving in to the child, or the child is going to win. But that's clearly not his model. And he's clearly saying, no, ultimately, we are going to get A done. I'm just asking for input from the child to figure out how can we get there, so that, this is less of a struggle, and that in a way that you might buy into. And, sometimes that might mean like, okay, we need to get in the car now, but, you're not ready to get in the car. So what if we, run around the car, 5 times first and then get in, or, whatever it might mean. But it's creatively coming up with solutions. And one of the things that I like about that from a skill building perspective is that it's really also introducing cognitive flexibility. So this idea that, kids can move past sort of a rigid, fixed idea of how something has to be, and explore other options. And what I especially like about that is that it challenges parents to also get rid of that rigidity, because I think parents can be even more rigid than their kids.
Yeah, I see it as this piece of adventure almost. Like I've talked a lot about adventure, and how as a part of adventure you have to be uncomfortable and brave and let go of your attachment to certain outcomes. And I feel like that the collaborative model really taps into that as well, because you have to be willing to try their ideas and try their solutions. And it takes a bit of a sense of adventure to do that, in addition to the trust. Like because you just try it. Like, let's just try it, and you try it, and then you revisit, and then you make adjustments, and then you try it, and then you come back and you say, so what did you learn? What did we all learn from that? What worked? What didn't? What adjustments should we make?
Yeah. And, when families get caught up in these, top-down models, they're really getting mired in these power struggles constantly. And the collaborative problem solving helps shift from that, because it's already removing that element, and many parents feel that their child is being, oppositional would be the word that they use, for opposition's sake. In other words, it might not even be that they have a reservation about the thing that they're being asked to do, but they're doing it kind of to oppose you. And I would say, if that's the case, that's a relationship problem. That's not a behavior problem.
Yes. The reward punishment model assumes an unwillingness, whereas the collaborative model assumes a lag in a skill.
That's right. And so even if there has been a history of that reward punishment model, and there's this power struggles that exist, even just starting to shift to more collaboration can build some of that trust back, and a child might start to be a bit more open to it as a result. You're automatically just removing that power struggle from that situation. So it's definitely a step, towards that reconnection and towards that that connection and collaboration. So it's such a useful tool if parents are willing to take that leap.
Yeah. It's so funny. I had been talking about connection and collaboration in place of discipline for years before I found Ross Greene's Explosive Child book.
Exactly.
And it was awesome because it was so confirming. He works like in these institutions and with, these severe cases, and sort of plays out the collaboration piece all the way like to the end of the spectrum. Which I love. So I will definitely link to that book in the show notes too.
Yeah.
Okay, now I want to talk about expectations. My most popular meme of all time reads, "Your expectations are the problem, not your child." This is a huge missing piece to so many conversations around discipline. Before you even move into all of these things we're talking about, check your expectation. If they're showing you they have a need, believe them. For example, I had a parent ask, every time we visit my parents' house, my 3-year-old son almost breaks the expensive glass vase on the end table. My parents keep telling me he needs more discipline, but nothing I try works. Check your expectations, girl. It is not developmentally appropriate to expect a little scientist of that age to stay away from or be gentle with a new, large, shiny, reflective surface that they're compelled to explore. So, solution, when you arrive at your parents' house, move the vase. Problem solved. If there are numerous items your parents don't want your child to touch, explain that they are welcome to place them all in a closed room or spend time with their grandchild in a different environment during this season of their development. So your child is not the problem. The expectation is. I would love to have you share more with us here about brain development and expectations.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that I can't even sort of universally say that parents' expectations are too high, because I think they're actually just off. In some ways they're high, but in some ways they're way too low.
I totally agree.
Yeah, so it's really about sort of trying to recalibrate to what should be expected of their child. And, I hear examples similar to the one you just gave all the time. And then those same parents will, feed their child their food, even though they're perfectly capable of doing it. Or, don't have any expectations about their child, taking off their clothes and putting them in a hamper.
And don't let their children feed themselves.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So they're all over the place with expectations.
Yeah, I completely 100% agree with that. And I want to add that it's completely different from child to child. Like your expectations have to be completely different because each child's way of being and personality and needs are different. So that point of like to being too high or too low, they're just a little bit off, especially I find from kid to kid. Like you can't hold the same expectations for each child even.
Exactly. Of course. Exactly.
Which is why I'm not a fan of developmental charts. a little tangent that I won't dive into. But oftentimes these conversations, particularly around discipline, start with a parent asking me for a developmental chart. I want to know what I should be able to expect my child to do in terms of responsibilities and coping and all of that at each 6-month interval.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. I'm like, or just stop typing and go play. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And, we get caught up in these developmental charts and looking at these behaviors to expect without actually understanding what to expect from a brain development point of view. And, I think that in terms of brain development, I mean, we can talk a little bit about that. And, babies are born with, 100 billion, probably more neurons, and have, the vast majority of the size of their brain by the time they're 2 years old. And they're forming these neural connections so rapidly in these first 3 years, especially, and 700 new neural connections each second practically. And these connections are made in part by genetics, but in also a large part through experience. And so what they experience in terms of their exposure to, activities and interactions with people, most of all, and language, really affects how their brains are wired. And the part that I think a lot of parents, or that's new for a lot of parents, is this idea of what parts of the brain are developed well, sort of quickly at birth, and what parts aren't. So, the brain stem, in the limbic system, these very primitive parts of the brain that are sort of more the homeostasis parts of the brain, like for our temperature regulation and our fight or flight system and our core emotional reactivity, those are pretty well developed at birth. So that's why we have big reactions. But the part of the brain that's not well developed in early childhood is the frontal lobe, and in particular the prefrontal cortex.
Which makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint.
Yes, exactly.
Because you have to ensure your survival first.
Exactly. And so, we have the fight or flight system in place, and that's great. And it's wonderful that we don't have to spend 10 minutes deciding whether the tiger coming towards us is safe or not for us. It's great. That's important.
Exactly.
But, the ability to not know, how to handle if I have the blue plate instead of the green plate is not as critical.
Yeah.
So it's better that our brains are putting energy toward, movement and language and the other parts of the brain that are developing. And one of the things that I hear often from parents is, but she knows she's not supposed to be doing that and she does it anyway. And I say, yes, that's right. Because cognitive development and emotion regulation don't develop hand in hand. They're not, they're not in sync with one another always. And, coming back to this idea of the prefrontal cortex, really that's the part of our brain that's responsible for these higher order thinking skills like emotion regulation and impulse control and planning and organization, and things that we see break down in young kids when they're emotionally taxed by a situation. They just don't have that capability yet because that prefrontal cortex isn't developed yet. And so really all of those things that we've been talking about thus far are really in service of developing that prefrontal cortex. And it's one of the parts of the brain that's most susceptible to parent sort of input in terms of the impact that parent interaction has in terms of its development. So really when you're facilitating that self-regulation or that calming down or that emotional insight, you're developing that prefrontal cortex for that child. And so, if we expect that a child can handle these situations without getting upset, it's not understanding that part of the brain is not fully developed. And as I said, is not fully developed really until late adolescence. So, it's so far out of whack in terms of what to expect. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And for some, still lagging.
But, so true. When I hear parents say a lot, I've seen her do it before, so I know she can do it.
Yes, exactly.
And I want to touch on that little example because that is not how brain development works. So, maybe your kid handed another kid an object that they had been playing with when they expressed that they wanted it, but that doesn't mean that when there is an object that they are treasuring and really focused on and someone says, give me that, they're going to be able to just hand it over. And a side note, sharing is this whole other conversation.
Exactly. Sure. We could go down the sharing rabbit hole for a while.
Exactly. But brain development just doesn't work that way. And sometimes I tell parents, imagine there are 10 units of emotional and attentional energy, say at any given moment. And maybe when your child is well rested and just ate their favorite meal and has been cuddling with you for 30 minutes and all of everything, all their levels are high. They're not outputting a lot of emotional and attentional energy. And then something happens, they may be able to navigate it pretty easily. It might seem effortless and they might be able to tap into this skill set that their fingertips are just starting to touch on. But then at another time, their emotional coping cup is fuller. Maybe they're running on they've already used 8 of those 10 units of emotional energy. And so they can't quite reach it that day. Their hands are too full. They can't reach it. And then also brain development doesn't unfold on a linear path.
Exactly. Nor in an all or nothing way.
Yeah. Sleep is a good example of that in that when kids have new developmental awarenesses, you often see, some people call it regression, but I say progression because their brain is growing and developing. And sometimes behaviorally, you might see what looks like regression, but really it's this new developmental awareness or this new skill that expresses itself, in all these other unexpected ways.
That's it. And I think, we underestimate sometimes how much we as adults struggle with these things too. This idea of, competing interests is important because as you described, someday a child might happily share one of their toys, probably because they were not interested in continuing to play with it or it didn't really matter that much. But, there are days when, I want to go for a run and I feel great about it and I do it. And then there's other days when I'm like, oh, but I have to do this and this and this. And I'm really feeling kind of lethargic or lazy today. And so I have competing interests. And, sometimes my higher order thinking skills, which know I'd be better off if I did the run, just can't overcome that some days.
Yeah.
And if I can't overcome that some days and other adults can't overcome it some days, how on earth is a 3-year-old supposed to overcome it, or a 7-year-old,
And sometimes I snap at my husband and sometimes
Yeah,
I don't. Like,
exactly.
I know that ideally, like, I would never snap at my husband, and I would be in complete and total control of all of my emotions and my emotional regulation. And I would have fully learned all of the skills that I need, to be 100% non-reactive.
Exactly.
But in reality, like, somebody pisses off Obama sometimes too, like none of us can be our 100% best selves every second of every day.
Exactly. And, I think that we have to be able to expect of ourselves, at the very least, what we're expecting of our children.
Yeah.
And
to be perfectly imperfect.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. We all have our own temper tantrums and meltdowns. They just look a little different.
Yeah. For sure. And it's so cool too, because I want to get into role modeling next, but like the people that we share connection with, like when they get to know us and know our needs and know our languages and the things we need in the different moments, as parents, we often see it as perfectly okay for adults to support each other in that way, but we see it as like a crutch or a weakness when we support our children in that way. For example, when I start to get overwhelmed, my husband will come over and give me a really big hug and make a few decisions, like just right off the bat. Like we'll make a few decisions, just sort of hold the space for me to like feel his love and his strength and like borrow that for a minute, and I can like calm myself down and know that everything's okay and feel like there's someone there with me helping me out, helping to carry the load and the mental load, and then like after like just a couple minutes of that, I can then like take a deep breath and then turn around and get back into that, and people would look at that from the outside and say like, oh, that's awesome. That's like a healthy, like loving relationship. But then when a parent thinks about doing that for a child, there's this hesitation.
Exactly. And, it's such a good example. And sometimes when I'm having a conversation with a parent about what they're referring to as compliance, they've asked their child to do something and the child's either ignoring them or seemingly not listening or whatever it might be. And if I suggest that they go over to them and get down their level and give them a bit of a hug first, or some kind of physical connection, and then ask them, at first they kind of feel like, well, why would I reward them with a hug when they're not listening to me? And again, it's getting into that notion of like, no one would ever ask you, well, why is your husband rewarding you with a hug when you're cranky? No one would ever ask that.
Yes.
And yet for the more vulnerable, we suddenly have a higher standard, and it makes no sense. It's not
childism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because they have an even greater lack of skill. And I don't mean that in like a shame-based way, but just in a brain development way. Like they need even more of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So role modeling.
Let's dive into role modeling.
One of our most powerful tools in connection with our children is role modeling. It is a tremendous avenue for learning, and that's really what we're talking about when we talk about discipline. How do you respond when shit happens? What do you do when your buttons get pushed? How do you navigate conflict? Be the change you want to see in the world. I love that quote, and I think we should live the qualities that we want to foster in our children. So what advice do you have for parents to harness the power of this force for good?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that spoke to me a lot was a quote from Laura Markham, where she talks about blame is just anger looking for a target. And I love the way that she phrases that, because I think that a lot of times as parents, when we're reacting, we're really just trying to discharge our own feelings. Yeah. We're not actually trying to we think we are trying to solve the problem, but we're not. We're trying to solve the problem of the feeling that I have inside.
Much yes.
by dumping that on your child is, has not only just worsened the situation and worsened your relationship, but it doesn't actually help you either, even though it feels good in the moment. And so, that understanding that, that blame is really just a way of trying to get rid of that feeling for us can sometimes be helpful to then maybe come up with your own little mantra, a little thing that you can tell yourself about, keeping yourself in check and being stronger. You want your child to have this notion that they can be the hurricane, but that you will be the calm next to the storm, that you're not going to get swept up in the hurricane with them.
Yeah.
And
I sometimes describe that as being the anchor. I tell parents to be the emotional anchor. So you can sit right in the middle of the storm, and you can anchor them with a sense of like calm and security, and such that the storm can pass, and they'll be centered exactly where they need to be.
That's it.
They won't
So
get
in terms
swept
of
away.
role modeling that, exactly. So in terms of role modeling it, I mean, just how do I navigate the minor annoyances of each day or the big frustrations? What am I saying out loud about mistakes I make? Like, oh, that was stupid. Things like that. Like, how am I treating myself in moments that are frustrating or when I'm feeling angry? And do they see me take a deep breath, think about things in a, from a different perspective, try to interpret things from a different framework? Do they see me take a break and trade off and say, mommy's a little too upset right now. I can't, I need to calm myself right now. So I'm going to step away for a second, and I feel perfectly comfortable saying those things to them. And they know that, what I'm doing is taking care of myself. And when you have a trusting relationship and when you provide empathy and connection for them in those moments, they can tolerate that. Yes. But I find that when you are parenting from a reward and punishment kind of model, if you try that, it activates that anxiety of rejection. Yes. And so then children start pursuing you. Like, you walk away, you try to go to your room, and then they're frantic and they're chasing. And then that increases the agitation the parent's feeling.
Yes, because the connection is too fragile.
That's right. It's too fragile. And so when you parent from a place of connection, it is much easier to then say, I need to check myself right now. Can you look at a book for a few minutes, or, can you color for a few minutes while I go, get a drink of water or do something? Yeah. But every one of these little moments is a moment that they're taking in. And, children learn far more from imitation than instruction. Yes. So, when you whine about your day, or, and it's not to say that we don't do these things sometimes, of course, but in general, if you're whining about your day or griping about, the person who cut you off in the grocery store or whatever it might be, these are all things that they pick up. And this is how they grab onto these tools and use them themselves.
And of course, those qualities that we, or choices that we don't like about ourselves are the most triggering when they're reflected back to us in our children.
Yes. Yes. So true.
And I feel like when we're talking about role modeling, we have to touch on this modern false idol of the perfect mother, because that undermines so much natural learning. And in the reward punishment model of discipline, that is really built on the false idol of the perfect mother idea, because you are up on high and knowing all and seeing all and being all. and in the connection and collaboration path, we do not pretend to be perfect. And we share that perfect imperfection, as I sometimes talk about. Like, that's how I view myself, as perfectly imperfect. We share that with our children, and there's tremendous learning in that. Like, I can share my thoughts and my feelings, and my kids, while they're in connection with me, get to see how I move through that, and how I, build up some skills that I feel are lagging in certain areas, or how I manage or regulate my feelings. If I say, I'm going to step outside and just breathe in the breeze and feel the sunshine on my face for a minute. You are welcome to come sit in the hammock with me, and then we can come back and we can finish this conversation. We can figure out how to move forward together. But I just need to take a minute to like air out my feelings, and they can when they're in connection with you, they learn through that. So if you are pretending to be perfect and saying that you're perfectly fine all the time and you're always smiling, and if you feel something unpleasant, you hide it, and probably because you feel shame about it from the way that you were raised, where you were told that having those feelings or not being 100% in control, you would get punished for it. Then you have this baggage of shame that goes along with it. Sure. So you don't want to share it with your children. But really inviting them in to see your process is a tremendous opportunity for learning.
Absolutely. And, I find for myself, one of the things that happens is if I haven't been taking enough care of myself in terms of, working too late at night. I know I'm a night owl. And so, after I fall asleep with them at bedtime, and then I sort of superhero, like extricate my arms from underneath them and come do work, sometimes I'll catch myself up really late and I have to say, no, don't do that, because I feel it the next day. Maybe not always, but if I've done it enough times in a row, then I feel it. Or if I haven't been, if I've been running around trying to cater to them or help them, and I haven't made myself something to eat, then I find myself more snappy. And, sometimes it takes a little bit, because always in those moments, at least for myself, you feel justified in your snappiness.
Totally.
So I was like, no, totally, I'm right, because I must be right. And then when you kind of hear your own voice after a while, you're like, I can't be right that many times this hour or whatever it might be.
Yes. And because my kids feel connected and in collaboration, they will totally hold me accountable. So they'll come over and give me a hug. My 6-year-old the other day came over and said, I feel like you need a hug right now. I'm just like, give me a hug. And then it's like, I did need a hug right now. And I was getting a little snappy or whatever.
Exactly. And so when I can take that moment and go like, guys, I'm hearing my voice now. And I think I have to take a moment. This exact example happened last week, and I don't remember what they were asking me to do, and I was suddenly getting a bit snappy, and I said, you know what? I need to take a time out. I can't do anything else until I make myself some lunch. And I need to eat, and then after I eat, I can, help you with this. What can you do in the meantime while I eat my lunch? Because I realized that I was just getting snappy, and and I was hungry. And so, by articulating that, then you're giving them that insight into, and that awareness of their own, state, to be able to figure out why they're reacting the way that they are, or whatever it might be. And the ability as a parent that when you do fuck up, like all of us do, that you can repair, right? And understanding that repair is so powerful. So, being able to go back and say, I'm really sorry that I was snapping at you earlier. That wasn't about you. It was me, Or sometimes I'll say, your part might have been this, which I talked about, but my part was this. Yes. And I really want them to understand that notion of responsibility.
Yeah,
that
like what you do affects me, and I'm responsible for my own response.
But I'm still, exactly. And so, yes, you could have done this differently, but I could have done this much differently, and I could have handled it much differently. And so that opportunity to repair is so critical. And, that myth of perfection and that, perfect mother doesn't allow for the growth that comes from reparation.
Exactly.
Just like muscles, when you exercise your muscles, you're exercising them to the point of exhaustion, and then you build them up. And, that happens because none of us can be 100% attuned, 100% responsive appropriately. And so what we do with those moments that we aren't is more powerful than, and certainly more useful than trying to pretend that we don't have them, or that we're trying so actively to avoid them.
Yes, I completely 100% agree.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about boundaries. Often people have a misconception that being attuned and attentive lies in conflict with freedom and autonomy, but I actually find them to be perfectly harmonious. They nurture
Yeah.
each other in the same way that connection fosters independence. In other words, our play dates are not Lord of the Flies. So in our family, we have 3 agreements, which is the word I like in place of rules, which is really based in that top-down structure. Respect yourself, respect others, respect the environment. Now, that language is very abstract, certainly too abstract to be helpful in a concrete way for a very young child. But those 3 agreements provide the boundaries or safe containment in our family. So long as you are doing no harm, we live in freedom, and the answer is yes. Now, if someone is out of alignment with those agreements, we address it through connection and collaboration. In other words, we find a quality yes. So it may not be a yes to that exact thing you're trying to do. For example, if you want to experiment with a hammer and you are walking over to the new drywall we just put up with a hammer, I might step in, as that's not respecting our environment, but then we would collaborate. I see that you really want to learn how to use a hammer and you want to play around with that. I think that's a great skill to build. You can see that we're using that skill as we renovate our house. So let's look for a way for you to exercise that skill and for you to play around with the hammer. We have some scraps of wood over here. We have some drywall scraps over there. What way do you think would be best for you to learn how to do it? So we're finding a quality yes. Now, what agreements or boundaries does your family have?
I think ours primarily is respect. That's the one that they sort of would be able to describe themselves.
Yeah.
And, what respect means in terms of how we break it down is one, just speaking to each other respectfully. So not name calling, not teasing, and answering, people when they're speaking to you, and then respect for people's bodies. So, that's obviously a big one. So if someone, if someone doesn't want to kiss, we don't give a kiss. If someone doesn't, we ask before we touch people. And so respect, that falls under respect in our family also. And the idea with respect also in terms of consequences, if you will, if you want to put it that way, in our house, they understand the concept of repair. So, if somehow they have violated the respect in some way, then the step that they need to take is to repair in some way. And, I don't impose the manner in which they repair, and I don't impose the timing, at which they repair. So I don't say, you need to apologize to your brother right now. Right. I say, you can see what you did hurt your brother's feelings. I'd like you to think about what you're going to do to make it right. Let me know when you've thought of something.
Your brother is hurting. How can we move forward together? How can we help your brother?
Exactly. And sometimes that is, running and getting a cold cloth and a glass of water, or sometimes it's drawing a picture, or sometimes it's an apology. But again, I don't impose what those are or when they do them.
Because they would of course know better. That's right. They would know even better than you what their sibling what would make them feel better.
Exactly. So, so that's sort of in terms of the boundary and agreement that we have, that's sort of their understanding. And then I guess linked to that is responsibility, so, can I take my Spider-Man with us when we go to, the park? Yes, but then it's your responsibility. So, I'm not going to carry it. But if you can carry it, and if you have a place to put it, if you're climbing on something, then you can take it. So, and same thing with at home, if they're playing with something, it's their responsibility to clean it up. Now, I might choose to share in that responsibility. By my choice, I might say, you got a big mess here and you're doing a great job. Let me help you clean it up. So I might choose to share in that responsibility in the same way that I would hope that, if my husband's so-called job was to always, unload the dishwasher, that some days I might do it, because we want to treat each other with respect and support
if
each other.
If you see someone you care about is doing something big, it would be completely normal for you to step in and help.
Exactly. But so ultimately that idea of responsibility is probably the other boundary. So that's really the main ones. I don't we don't
Yes.
have a lot of rules, so-called rules, because as you said, you want to find the yes as often as possible.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to be creative in finding those, but
So it sounds
but
like
yeah,
your family moves towards respect and responsibility and then
yeah,
away from harm. And then if any of those, if you're out of alignment with those agreements, then the language you would use is repair. Like you would shift
exactly,
into repair.
exactly,
I love that.
exactly.
I love that. I think that's an important point because, gosh, one time I was a guest on this podcast and they came from such a different parenting paradigm and they just kept harping on this like
Oh
misconception
no,
of like, so your kids have no boundaries, like they have no rules, like they just
oh
do whatever
no,
they want. And that's really not what it looks like because kids
right,
don't feel great if they feel like someone could walk up and punch them in the face at any moment, like that would be okay, like that doesn't feel good either.
no,
No, like we have to have these agreements or these
yeah,
boundaries that make us feel, like like a boundary in a marriage, like can serve to when they're like mutually agreed upon and based on shared values, they can help you to feel even more connected and loving
that's
and
right,
supported. Like I have the
exactly,
boundary that I'm not going to go marry someone else because I have agreed to be married to my one spouse. And then I feel safe and secure in being vulnerable and investing into my relationship because I know that he's not going to go off tomorrow and marry someone else. Like we're committed to
right,
each other. Like that's like a simple example, but really that whittles all the way down like to kids
sure,
too. And I think the piece
exactly,
that really makes it like unschooling friendly, gentle parenting friendly, I think the difference is that you are including your children in this conversation
right,
of what your boundaries are. And
right,
like some kids have different needs than others. One
right,
child might go through a phase where they're incredibly sensitive to touch, and
yeah,
so maybe your boundaries will shift slightly as a family to accommodate that. It's like a living, breathing, evolving system, and everyone's needs and everyone's voices are a part of that conversation.
exactly. And, I think that I come up against the same thing sometimes. And I would say, in fact, if anything, it's kind of the opposite. I think I have quite high expectations of my children, but
Mm-hmm.
high, appropriately high, and
Yeah.
high in the right domains and areas.
Yeah. High
So I
based on your
expect them to be,
values.
that's right. I expect them to be, respectful, but not in a, obeying way, but in a, kind and thoughtful way. So I have a lot of expectations of them, but I don't need a lot of boundaries to enforce those. They fall under, a pretty clear set of skills or areas.
Yeah. We live out in the world. My children are 12, 9, and 6 now. And so, most kids that are the ages of my kids are in school all day long. So when
Hmm.
we are out and about and living in society, I think it's unusual, or it's a valuable and slightly unusual experience for people to get to be in the presence of children around this age in the different areas that we go.
Right.
And I get, there are two, like, I think main themes of feedback that I get from people. Like one is that people, I would say probably every other day that we go out somewhere, people communicate to me that they are blown away by how wonderful my children are, which I don't mean to share in like I'm awesome kind of way, because it's totally not about that. It's just
No.
about like people are surprised they're not used to seeing parents and children in this connection collaboration model.
Right.
So to see
Yeah.
a parent like join with a child and work through something, and then to see what that looks like with the kids on their level, with how they interact with each other and how they interact with other people in our community. I
Right.
think it's unusual for them to see that, and so I think that it's not what they're used to seeing with that reward punishment
Exactly.
model where the parents are at the top and they're barking orders and the kids either obey or they don't. I think it's something
Exactly.
new for people to see. And then the other piece is that people are super uncomfortable with the level of freedom
Yeah.
that my children enjoy. And and people, again, probably about every other day that we're out in the community, somebody will remark about that. And it's
Yeah.
not, and I think that people are uncomfortable with the level of freedom that children are given, particularly like on the unschooling path, mainly because they were not granted that freedom, when they
Right.
were growing up, sort of
Yeah.
like you have to pay your dues kind of a mindset.
Exactly.
And so they're uncomfortable with children having that level of freedom. But it's interesting to me how those two themes like interplay
Yes.
together, like
Yeah.
especially in a conversation about boundaries, that because we have so much connection and collaboration, and people talk about how wonderful that is when they see it, they also, the flip side of that coin is that they have a lot more freedom because there's a lot more trust. Like I've
Right.
invested on the front end. And so I
Right.
can trust that as they experience different things and have different conversations and come up against different challenges, they have the security and the skills to work through them and to make really good choices, not because I'm hovering over them, telling them
Exactly.
no to five
Yeah.
different things, but because they know
Exactly.
how to judge if something is a safe choice, and they know how to
Yes.
navigate that decision-making process in a way that respects other people's needs and respects their needs and all of that. So I think that
Yes.
if you are not walling up all of these boundaries everywhere and enforcing them, what
No.
happens is you've held the space for your children to be able to navigate that system on their own and to have their own system of boundaries, which in the context for me would be like agreements with others about
Exactly.
like respecting others and respecting environment and respecting themselves, and what that looks like when you're not the one who's like walking them like with a leash like a dog, like they have the autonomy and the freedom to navigate that on their own.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely the mom who gets the odd looks from,
Yeah,
when we're in the playground or something and,
going up
my
the
kids are
slide, you
jumping, going
rebels.
up the slide, or they're jumping from the top of the play structure right down to the sand or the
Yes.
ground. And, they're looking at me. Or even the other day we were in a sort of the lobby of an office building, and, there was this elaborate kind of staircase, and part of the staircase was sort of set off to the side. So it was nowhere in the line of traffic of people, or nowhere that it would have been problematic. And so my kids were climbing all over it and jumping down to a spot that was, out of the way. And a man came out of the elevator and was walking down the hall, and he said, I was going to say something about what they're doing because I'm a little worried, but I realized they're not my kids. And I said, that's true. And he just kept walking. and, um, and, and then my son said, what did that gentleman say? And I said, well, he's worried about whether you're being safe. And he said, we're being safe. Can't you see that we can jump perfectly well from here? I'm like, well, apparently not. No.
Yeah, and that
But
like
yeah,
sense of knowing your limits at every different
yeah,
stage, that
yeah,
they really see you as allies, and they're really able to build up their skill set when you take this approach, because when they're young, they will say, Mommy, I want to jump off that big boulder. What
yeah,
do you think about that? And I might
yeah,
say, like, well, I'm noticing that like there's concrete at the bottom of it on this side, but on the back side there's grass, and then he'll say like, oh, right. So if I jump off the grass side, there'll be a little more cushion in the landing. What if like you held my hand the first time, but then if after I try it, it feels okay, then you take one step back and we'll see how that feels. Okay, let's try it.
yeah,
Like we talk through this, and then as they get older, they I would say like engage in those conversations with me less often because we've already had them so much. They have a
exactly,
clear idea and sense of what they need at every given skill set.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, now
Yeah.
let's talk about playfulness.
Okay.
Play is the world in which children process, and tragically, playfulness is something so often lost to us in adulthood.
Yeah.
I hold schools responsible for a lot of the death of creativity, but that, of course, that's a whole different conversation. So when we lean into playfulness, we unlock a whole new dimension of connection with our children and joy within ourselves. For us, that often looks like a sense of humor and adventurousness. Talk to me about playfulness.
So I'm glad you mentioned sense of humor too, because I think that when I talk to families about playfulness, sometimes they kind of get stuck in this notion of like, I don't like getting down on the floor and playing
Right.
Legos. And, they have this sort of fixed idea of what playfulness means. And I think
Good
it's
point.
important to use the word playfulness, not just play,
Right.
because playfulness is really about an approach rather than an activity. And so for me, I mean, this is where a lot of my joy comes as a parent, is in that playfulness. And I feel like, because we're playful together, it's enriching and it's enjoying and it's validating and fulfilling. And when I think about parents who don't engage in that way and they're stuck in these sort of more traditional models, and sometimes I'll say like, what an exhausting and horrible way to parent. Like it just feels awful.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't feel good to do it like that. So often when I'm working with families, I find that by the time they come see me, they've lost the pleasure of each other's company.
Yes.
And to me, my goal is to get you enjoying your child again.
Yes.
So your goal might be reduce tantrums or this or that. My goal, which I'm very upfront about, is I want you enjoying each other again.
Yes.
And so what can we do to make that happen?
Freedom, connection, and joy. Like those are the three things that are like my tagline for my business.
Exactly.
Joy is a huge one.
That's right. And so, I try to find those moments of joy, and if they existed before, what did they look like, and how can we bring those back? And and then in small ways, like at home, cleanup time. Nobody likes cleanup time, but they do like cleanup time with music, especially when mommy's dancing around like a fool. While they listen. So they each have their own preferred cleanup songs. They have, in my opinion, terrible taste in music, but so Evangeline wants to clean up to Katy Perry singing Roar, and Sawyer likes Uptown Funk. Those are their cleanup songs. Sometimes they deviate from those, but really, that's what they want. And so it kind of gives them a sense of time too, which is helpful.
Yeah.
And I feel better when, because for me, either singing or dancing or moving in that way is something that calms me. Absolutely. And so I find if I'm, especially near the end of the day and we're starting the bedtime routine, if I find myself getting caught up in time and, pressure, then for me, it's also really helpful. Then I can sort of tune out of that pressure and tune into the music, no pun intended, and really just engage in that way. And so then it becomes silly. They're laughing at me. They might say with me, but I'm sure it's at me. And, and they're having more fun, and it just makes it much easier. And it also provides a bit of a time constraint where I can say like, okay, when this song is over, I'm going in the room and I'm putting the blinds down and, I'm doing this, and then I'm getting the books, I'm going to start reading the books. So whoever's ready is going to be ready for the books. So it kind of helps in that way. Or,
it taps the vein of joy, and it brings a lightness.
For sure.
And I think that's so important, because especially if you're in that like top down reward punishment model, it's so heavy and there's no joy in that. Like it's so negative.
It feels
so
awful.
To be playful, even and especially in the hard moments. And I think what that looks like specifically is going to vary for each individual and with each child. Like I inherited from my father an incredibly sarcastic sense of humor, and my firstborn like loves that. And if she is like, something has happened and she's in a bit of a funk, I will sort of like layer on the sarcasm, a little bit like of dark sarcasm, and
that's right.
It totally makes her laugh every time and like breaks her out of that. But if you were sitting at a table next to us in a restaurant and they were out of like the food she wanted, and I would say something like, freaking restaurant, like this place is the worst, like we are never coming here again, I'm just like layering it on, and she's like smirking and smiling and giggling. Of course someone at the table next to me would be like, oh my god, like this person is the worst. So from the outside, like it may not look like playfulness, quote unquote, but that is playfulness, like for her. Like I know that helps her in that moment.
Exactly. And sometimes, if my kids are upset about something, and then I can see them start to shift out of that. Timing is important too for playfulness, I find.
For sure.
And if I can see them start to shift out of that, and if one of them sort of cracks a smile or something like that, then I might jump up and be like, hold on, you are violating the rules of anger. There should be no smiling right now, and then they'll lose it. But I could never do that. Like, I can't do that when they're still mad, because then that's, number one, it's condescending and it's patronizing.
Right.
So, we have to be careful with sense of humor, that the timing is right and the receptiveness is there. And I know that they like when I do that if I time it right.
And it's the humor language of that child.
That's right. Exactly.
Like for my third, who's like super physical, like the playfulness often looks physical. Like if he is in a funk, it looks like chasing and wrestling and throwing him around and carrying him around in really kind of rough and tumble ways.
Exactly.
And whereas that would not at all have helped like my first. So it totally varies, like from kid to kid, and what their style is.
That's it. And, one of their favorite sort of games right now, and often I do it, for transitions, because it helps either get to the teeth brushing or getting dressed or whatever. It's, they'll want to go on my back, and then I have to pretend that I can't find them and that they're behind me. And so I keep like frantically searching left and right while they're on my back, and they're losing it. So they like things like that. Or for Evangeline in particular, because what her body needs, she needs a lot of proprioception. So she needs a lot of, deep pressure and touch for her body. So for her to feel calm, she needs a lot of that. So for example, for her, if we're going to go clean up or go to the bathroom or go have her bath or whatever it might be, for her, I might do a wheelbarrow walk with her. So, she's on her hands and I'm holding her feet and we're walking that way, because then her body's getting what she needs. And we're transitioning to, what she needs to do. So it's fun, and we engage in that way. Or, teeth brushing, I always, was searching for animals in their mouth. And so I'd say, like, what is the tiger doing in your mouth? Or why is this? And they would, to me, it's funny, because especially for young kids, this playfulness is such a rich avenue for connection, that it feels like, how would you not exploit it? It's right there in front of you.
I think it takes really setting aside ego. Like a lot of adults get hung up on the ego piece.
Yeah.
Like they can't get out from under that. You really have to be willing to set your ego aside and dance like a fool and sing like you're tone deaf, and that makes you even more accessible to connection from your kid's perspective. Like when you have set your ego aside, they feel like even safer in connecting with you. So factoring in your individual kid's personality and needs, and getting the timing right, and setting aside your ego to connect. Exactly.
And sometimes the resistance that I find from parents is, not everything should be a game. That's the line I hear a lot. Not everything has to be a game. And it's true. But when we get caught up in these shoulds, then again, it's getting to what you're saying, which it's just ego. It's just pure ego getting in the way. And for me, at least in my parenting, it's much more enjoyable when I engage in that way.
So much more enjoyable.
For me as well as for them. And I feel we're far more productive. So it's also functional. So emotionally it's fulfilling, functionally it's fulfilling. And every one of these moments is enriching the connection. And so if we think about every action that we take as a parent, either brings us closer together or pushes us further apart. And this playfulness is what it brings us together more. And again, when you move away from reward and punishment, then the so-called leverage that you're looking for as a parent is love. It's your relationship. That's the so-called leverage. So all of this is in service of that. So, everything that you can do, yes, it sounds like it's sort of more energy, but really it's not. Again, it's the front end investment and
living a happy life.
For sure, exactly. And it helps, I find, even with impulse control, for example, like for my kids, if we were crossing the street, one of the ways that we would leave like parks or something like that is I would, find the closest fire hydrant, and I would have them, which is usually right, obviously on the sidewalk, right next to the street. So rather than saying like, no, you have to walk with me all the way to the corner of the street and whatever, I would say, run to the fire hydrant and meet me at the fire hydrant. And
Yeah.
then they did, and they would never go past it, and they would never go to the street, but they still got to run and still move,
Yes,
and be
using
playful.
playfulness to keep
Yes,
everyone safe and
exactly.
within boundaries. And I have found a lot that when a parent says, like, well, everything's not a game, and when they're having a hard time getting to that playfulness, there's the ego piece. And a big part of that ego piece is the need to be right.
Yes.
They struggle to connect in a playful way
Yeah,
if they have not been validated in their rightness.
for sure.
So as a
sure.
parent, to be able to set aside, like let go of the need to be right, like you can connect with your children. And this is like just loving unconditionally. You can connect with them and even go so far as to be playful with them, even when you don't love something that they're doing.
Right.
You have to be able to get out from under that ego and that need to be right. Because if you're loving unconditionally, then you can always tap into that at any point in the process of repair.
That's it. Exactly. And, coming back to this notion of we shouldn't expect things from our kids that we don't expect from ourselves. I mean, we do all kinds of things to make unpleasant tasks more enjoyable. We listen to great podcasts like this on our car ride, or whatever it might be. Like we do things to make our experiences more pleasurable too. So why is it any different for them?
Yes, completely agree. All right, now I posted in the Sage Parenting Tribe on Facebook that we were going to chat about discipline today and asked if they had any questions about it. And holy moly, comment avalanche. I know I tagged you in it. So I'm just going to pick one that I know you've mentioned a couple times throughout this podcast already, but it's a question that, so Megan asks, what about danger, like running into the street? And this is a great example for us to speak to because it's the example that gets brought up anytime I'm talking about discipline on the gentle parenting path as an example of a necessary exception. Of course, I disagree and actually cover this example in great detail in the Sage Parenting book. It has like its own huge section because I've had to speak to it so much. But what say you, Tamara? Surely if a child is about to run into the street, they need to be hit and yelled at and given a punishment.
Yeah, of course. No, of course not. Again, it's sort of about asking you're at the wrong end of the question again, like I've said with other examples, because if you yell frequently, and that's your sort of mode of discipline and you reward and punish, and you're not actually trying to instill the ability to make good choices when you're not there, which is really at the root of sort of collaboration and problem solving, then, you trying to yell at your child to stop at the corner of the street is useless. They've tuned out that no or that stop or that, that yelling, that it's become completely meaningless as a tool. And so, when they do it, first of all, that reactivity or a punishment is not going to change the fact that impulse control is still developing. Yeah. So coming back to that notion, they don't have any increased impulse control because you've now said that they can't, I don't know, do whatever when they get home after running in the street.
Right. It's an arbitrary.
Right. It's always arbitrary. So it's not even.
And it's often totally later. So it's not connected with it all.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you are yelling at them or imposing a punishment or hitting them, they learn. We have to ask that question. What are they actually learning? So in this case, they are learning to fear you, which has nothing to do with running into the street. You have to ask yourself, what is my child actually learning here? So if you want your child to actually learn about the street and about safety around cars, you yelling and punishing or hitting, that just teaches them to run into the street when you are not there.
Exactly.
Like, I want you to hear this really closely. So if you are using a reward punishment model, your children learn not to do these things when you are watching, which is not what you want them to learn.
That's right. I mean, rewards and punishment really do just teach kids to be better at hiding and lying.
Yeah, it's fear-based and it just promotes hiding and lying.
That's right. But, if your child really isn't capable of making safe choices when it comes to whatever it might be, climbing, crossing the street, whatever, then you need to modify how you go about those things in the same way that in the example you gave about the vase at, the grandparents' house. You don't
I
keep...
said vase. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
It was not a vase. It was a vase.
Well, I'll contextualize it for Canadian listeners. I'll translate. But, it's the same situation. Like, don't set them up to fail if you know that they're not quite capable of that yet. Find a way for them to do what they are capable, using scaffolding, which is, finding where they're at and helping them achieve sort of the next closest level to that. So, like I said, with the running across the street, for my kids, I don't trust that, or at that time, I do now, but at the time I didn't trust that they would stop at the corner. So we had an intermediary where I know they would stop, and I knew it was, within distance, and I could see them do it over and over again. So I trusted that it would be safe. So I don't give them that responsibility that they're not ready for yet. Right. So it's finding at the front end, what can you set up in terms of the structure of that to make it so that they can be successful.
Yeah,
but
knowing what they're capable of in terms of development and personality and needs, and then using playfulness to hold the boundaries for them when they're not ready to hold them for themselves. Like West was a hardcore runner, like run. And so when I knew that the end point would involve, getting to the end point would involve crossing a street, as soon as we got within eye shot of it, I would have to get really engaged with him and really playful. So maybe I would be a dinosaur and he would be riding on my back and I would stomp all the way there until we get to the other side of the street. But I knew that if I kind of just ignored him and focused on other things, it would be an issue. And then, so if I don't invest that energy again on the front end, I'd be investing it in the back end by chasing after him and being angry and worrying about safety and all of that. So I would invest the energy into the front end, and through playfulness, I would help to hold those boundaries for him. Now, the other side to this is that if you want your children to learn how to safely cross the street or any of the other kinds of things that are life and death, where you can't have natural consequences provide the learning, you have to, you can't just always and forever hold the boundaries for them or just say no. Like, for example, if your solution is a blanket rule that you always must hold a hand when you cross the street. You always have to be holding a hand when you cross the street. Well, that's not giving them the opportunity to learn anything about what makes crossing the street safe, how to make it safe. Like, first we stop at the end, and I would make that really playful. Ready, stop, and we look left, no cars, look right, no cars. So it's like ritual. It's ritual. It had sequencing, and it had I included my child in all of the things that allowed me to know that it would be a safe time to cross the street. And so you have to and then as he started reaching for more autonomy with that, I would grant it, so his ball would roll into the street, and he would look at the ball and look at me and say, is it safe to cross the street? Can you help me figure out how to get the ball? I would say, sure. Go right up to the curb with him, and we would sit there together and we'd say, okay, what are the things we do when we cross the street? We stop at the end. We look left, no cars. We look right, no cars. And you're saying you want to go step into the street to get to the ball without me. So why don't you look at my eyes and I will do the check from where I am. And he's like, okay, so take 2 steps back. Okay, so I'll take 2 steps back. He would stop, look left, no cars, look right, no cars, look at me. I would check for no cars, give him a thumbs up, and then he would go step into the street and get the ball. So rather than just saying, no, you can't ever go into the street. Which realistically, eventually he is going to have to go into a street. He's not going to live his whole life never crossing a street without my hand. He's going to be 20 at some point and need to go into a street. So provide the opportunity for him to learn those skills in ways that are age appropriate as he gets older, as he reaches for them. So I think that's an important piece that a lot of parents miss with these safety questions is how to hold the space for them to grow into more autonomy with it.
Right.
And they are 100% willing to do that within connection and collaboration with you if they know that you're going to find the quality yes, if they trust
Exactly.
that. So if they learn that the answer is no, then you move into secrecy and lying and doing it when you're not looking. If they trust that you are going to find the quality yes and honor their budding independence, then they will work with you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right, a day in the life. I want you to describe for us, Tamara, your favorite day this week or about within the last week, and share with us why you loved it.
So probably Saturday was one of my favorite days in recent days. Saturday is in our house. Saturday and Sunday are pancake days, so that is very exciting for our kids. They love pancakes and they love the ritual of pancake days, and so to the extent that Sawyer likes to even have his favorite underwear clean so he can wear them on pancake days.
Oh my God, I love this.
I'm sure 20-year-old Sawyer listening to this will be thrilled with me sharing that story. But yeah, so, it's a big deal. They love pancake days. And again, they happen to like pancakes, but it's actually more the ritual of it that they like even more. And so every Saturday morning that starts, with pancakes, it starts off great. And, especially on the weekends, everyone's home. And so I woke up with them in their bed and, got them ready and we had our pancakes. And then they had just gotten, they really like these Elephant and Piggy books. I don't know if you know them, but they're really sweet little book series that's just sort of banter between an elephant and a pig who are friends.
Is that the book series that has the political one? Where they're both running for the same office?
Oh, I'm not sure. I haven't seen that one.
I'm going to look
but
that
maybe.
up. I think it is.
They're Mo Willems books.
Yes. Yep. There's one about
Vote
elections.
For Me or something, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes, I think I have seen it.
It's a good one. We read it on Epic, and I was like, ooh, that's good. It was like right when the last presidential election was happening. It was perfect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a great series. And so they have a finger puppet of each of them. And, they were in their room after breakfast and they each had one and I could hear them and they were just enacting one of the books called I Can Fly. And they were just going through and they were from memory enacting the whole book. And I just sort of sat there at their door, just listening, not wanting to step in and derail them from this wonderful activity. But I just was eating it up. I just loved it. And, it was just fun to hear them, act, they're really putting everything into it. And, I'm astounded at their memory because even I don't remember the book that well. And, to hear them play off of each other with these characters was just so, so, so lovely.
Yeah, I love that.
So that was fun. And then later that day, we went to the botanical gardens where they had the Free the Butterflies exhibit. So we got to be inside with thousands of butterflies flying all around them. And
magic, nature magic.
It's so great. And Sawyer was just really eager to have one land on him. And it was kind of busy there that day. And I was just, hopeful for him. And, we talk about, not worrying about things that are beyond our control, but what can we do to make it happen? And, watch him, try everything to keep his body so still, in the hopes that something will land on him. And when it finally did, he was just elated and I could see him just, trying to hold it all in while not moving. And it was so great. It was just a lot of fun. So it was a really great day. And
I love that story.
Yeah,
I was like on the edge of my seat. I was like, is it going to land on him?
It did. So, and, Evangeline was happy because they had a little hopscotch thing in the middle of the botanical garden. So she gets to run and move and do that at the same time. And they each had their little booklets of the different butterflies there, and they were identifying which ones they saw. And then, we'd still look at them at home and which ones did we like, and, all of that. So it was a really, really fun day. Between Elephant and Piggy and butterflies, it was a great day.
Oh, that does sound like a good day.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
All right, now let's dive deeper. What are your favorite resources for families to learn more about this topic of discipline?
So clearly your website is definitely one that I direct so many parents to.
Thank you.
Of course. there's just, it's so rich, and every one of your blogs I could send to them and give them for homework to read. So definitely yours. And then the other one that I already mentioned as well would be Laura Markham's website, the AHA Parenting website. I think she has some really great posts about sibling interactions and how to facilitate problem solving with siblings, and sort of giving you some guidelines, almost a script for how to facilitate those, rather than diving in and trying to solve just in the way that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So I really like her stuff. And then the other thing I would say would be Tina Payne Bryson and Daniel Siegel's work, well, all of their work, but in particular the book No Drama Discipline.
I read The Whole Brain Child, but I have not read No Drama Discipline.
So, Whole Brain Child is wonderful, and for many reasons, but No Drama Discipline is really more of the applied aspects of that. So what does it look like from a discipline perspective? So it really kind of walks parents through this notion of, in a meltdown, how do you connect first, then redirect, or how do you, connect from that perspective. So I find it's a really good resource for parents too, and it kind of just reinforces the kind of stuff that we've been talking about, which is helping them understand the brain.
List, then.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I know I made you hide in a closet to
I love it.
to get good sound quality. So you've been in a little bit of solitary confinement.
It's cozy. It's cozy. I like small spaces. It's okay.
Well, thank you so much. And throughout this whole podcast, your profile image on Skype is of Evangeline hugging you. And, the whole time we're talking, I'm just staring into her adorable face.
Aww.
So thank you for that too.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciated the time with you and getting to chat about these things that we both love so much. So thank you.